Hello and welcome to Signal Shift. It's Sue here. I've got Rocky as well. Today marks the beginning of a new theme on finance and investing. And I thought we'd begin with actually a bit of a step back to look at the broader economic system or the economy. And I think it's important because humming underneath everything we do, from what we eat, where we work, how we move, how we live, it's our economic system. And so, as we've explored in so many episodes, the system wasn't really built to protect a lot of things like our health, our planet, our communities. So really, how do we move forward? And, previous generations have actually tackled this in different ways, right? So at least personally for me, I got super interested when I learned about Grameen Bank. I learned about C.K. Prahalad's pyramid theory and how we can make the economy more inclusive. And since then, there have been ideas more of microfinance, of social entrepreneurship, and now we're moving into this phase of just redefining the system altogether. Like, how do you make something that's more focused on a regenerative economy, focused on well-being, of climate, planetary boundaries, things like that. And of course, even now we're thinking about how AI is rebuilding the economy as well. So this episode, we're going to focus on new economic models, from anywhere from discovering small community pilots to maybe what larger cities or even countries are doing. So I'm curious, Rocky, what signals have you brought today?
I will say I don't think either of these are too new, but I think they're going to both be prominent. I think it speaks to where the world is going, and some of it is good and some of it is bad. So I'll start with the first one. And it's here already. I think I'll premise this with saying it's very hard to find any place or any country, certainly, that isn't a mixed economy, that doesn't apply many models. So within a specific community, sure, maybe you could apply one kind of principle. And for example, maybe a community could barter, right? And it could work within a small town, within a certain number of people. But the minute you increase the number of people and other complex factors that have to be managed, it gets really hard, right? And so it makes sense that we live in really the time of mixed economy, that countries have to apply many different principles and not just one to how, its economy functions. But I guess the first one, and this will be a polarizing one, I'm sure, and one we don't want to accept, but it's the whole concept of technology-driven economic model, right? It's completely based on technology driving both economic growth, productivity, and the premise under that is through that we have prosperity, right? And so through the technology, we ultimately have sustainable economic growth. Everybody does better, et cetera, et cetera. But certain countries have certainly leaned into this big time. Now, of course, the US has its own AI drive, many other countries do, but countries like South Korea are very much taking this approach to how they're setting up their countries and, what they want the economic model to be. And you can see this with what they're doing with the chip sector. They've got a $19 billion incentive package in the semiconductor industry, basically making that really the foundation of the economic prosperity. So there is the scary side of, yes, technology, but we know that there's an impact of what's happening to us socially as human beings, our mental well-being, as well as the toll on our resources, such as water and land, and how much of that we're using in power, right? Looking at the data around the data centers and how they're growing and how much land and water usage is happening with this, it is concerning. The future growth and expansion of the AI market is expected to surpass 825 billion by 2030. So so I think you spoke about this in a previous episode, right? But it's the extent of proliferation and growth of AI far surpasses what we've seen with other technology. We haven't even brought in advanced robotics yet. But the other positive thing that we cannot forget and we cannot escape also is because the truth is we can't really rewind and go back to old technologies. Maybe that's the answer, but I don't see that happening in society. All economies are going to some extent be technology driven. But the one hopeful thing is that technology also pushes the boundaries of what we can do in terms of renewable energy, in terms of sustainable sources, and coming up with clean energy solutions. We do need to use all this energy, but it can be clean, and we can do this the right way. And the only way to find some of those solutions is going to be technology. And so the very thing I know that is concerning us might also be the solution to us getting to this point of renewable energy and clean power and clean energy that can still drive technology, but keep our environment clean and safe and healthy. But yeah, I think we can't escape the truth of everything in every country and every space, I think, going to have some element of the mixed economy is going to be a technology-driven economic model.
Yeah, that's a really great point. And yeah, definitely love that signal because I haven't seen it coming forward. But of course, there's going to be that need. I think to your point, it's the question of, to what end are the resources going to be drawn? And when you think about longevity and sustainability, what are the costs, and is there an ultimate gain in the long run that will be had? Also funny that you brought up Seoul, because I also have a signal around Seoul. Of course, when we're thinking about new economic models, when things are fundamentally changing in society, it always begs the question for what's working now and what has to change. And there's a lot happening there, I think, that's interesting and bringing up a lot of new innovation. So yeah, I think bringing up Seoul, it's been in a lot of our episodes before. I'm also bringing up Singapore too, which has come up a lot. And for me, and this particular signal is around longevity. Makes sense, right? They both have aging populations. They've really had to think about what it means to reorient themselves towards an older population and this quote unquote longevity economy. And essentially what I think it means is it's moving from a place where you think of kind of older aging populations as like a huge cost and social burden to the economy, versus now thinking about it as an opportunity and a huge unrealized economic asset. So just a couple of things that I found. AARP and Oxford Economics Global Longevity, they had a global longevity economic outlook. They said people aged 50 and older are already 1/3 of global GDP today. And by 2050, it could be nearly 40%. And that's just current estimates. So there is an economist out there named Andrew Scott who wrote about kind of this longevity economy. And he said, if you increase health life expectancy by 1 year, that could equate to 4 to 5% of GDP. So it's like huge ramifications. So he was saying, like, imagine where you do have a society that's living longer, but also healthier. They're mentally active. I mean, so many of our episodes have been talking about this. And so everything has to change, the jobs, the innovation, new industries, the way you think about it. So I love that Singapore has been thinking about this for a while. They have an explicit focus on this so that older adults can continue to participate. So one thing I found was, it's actually been up for quite some time now. It's called the Kampong Admiralty area. And it's this vertical village concept where basically the goal is to have people age in place. And so it's designed where they integrate homes and living with retail, with schools, a hospital, social centers, quality of life, right? So people can garden, they can walk around, there's a plaza, they have food, the hawker stalls, like things like that, and a lot of green spaces. They also have a preschool there. So there's very purposeful intergenerational relationships that can be forged there. So it's just like one pilot example, as you said, like there has to be many more, but they have this idea of like active aging centers that they want all over Singapore. And so that's just one example in the design of what they're doing with different agencies in Singapore to come together, to collaborate, to have more of like a holistic design versus singular. Okay, you go to the hospital here, you go to work here, you go to school here, and now everything's incorporated. And beyond that, they're rethinking their retirement system. I think Lana a while ago brought this up, I think, about the Skills Future program in Singapore that allows basically people age 50 and older to reskill and earn credits to stay employable into the future. And they're also thinking safety nets, like all of those things, ideally because they want people to live well into 100 and live really these meaningful lives. They're already at 83 years old, right? So they're continuing to go into that. And then I would just say that Seoul is really similar. So last month, Seoul's metropolitan government actually issued an announcement saying they're going to have initiatives. It's called Healthier Soul 9988. I don't know what that means, but they actually wanted to talk about building a foundation of happiness and flourishing. So I thought that was interesting. And their idea, again, is we want to lower the health burden on the economy and actually help increase lifespan into something that people can be healthier and have more meaningful lives. So again, similarly, they're focused on disease prevention and longevity now, and really changing their infrastructure so that it's needed to make healthy choices. I'm sure there's a lot of tech built into that as well. But like you said, this is an example of Seoul and Korea thinking of these mixed economy models and how they need to grapple with different issues that are affecting their society and culture. So really interesting also to see how those two things will collide.
Yeah, I love that. I love both those examples. And I mean, I think we've naturally been drawn to countries and cities as our examples for these models. I think those are two great examples where technology is coexisting alongside other values, right? And alongside other economic models that support technology-driven economic models. So I think that is so interesting. And you're so right? If we are this aging population and the numbers look like what they do in the next couple of years, we have to be longevity and health-centered economies as well. And yeah, I'm going to be really interested to see what comes out of places like Singapore and South Korea, and and what they do and how they balance tech and wellness and well-being, and grow their economies, but not to the detriment of the well-being of their people. And you're right. I remember Lana spoke about the skills program. And I think we did an episode on smart cities, I recall, with Lana as well. And I think I spoke about a very similar example in Singapore, where they are building these kind of hubs of how do you integrate that the hospital is walkable, that, school's walkable, and that people don't have to use that much transport, and just keeping energy clean, but making it really useful and cost effective for the people living there.
And again, they don't have a choice. They have to think about this, and so it's great to see years of effort, what's coming of it. I couldn't really find any statistics on the impact it's had on the residents, for example, in this one area, but yeah, hopefully something will come out soon. I think on the flip side, just to mention what happens when you don't do this, right? So AARP also put out a call and a report that said in the US, if you don't close this, so there's this kind of life expectancy versus healthy lifespan gap. And if you don't close that, at least in the US, it's going to cost $1.6 trillion in lost economic activity by 2030. This is 2030. That is tomorrow. So it's really necessary to capture this economic value, have really good, meaningful lives for the future, and just think about that lost economic potential of all these people. So there is an active choice we need to make.
Totally, Sue. And I think fascinating, but countries like India are starting to creep up on the age of death sort of statistics comparative to the US, which I think is kind of going backwards. So, it's, there's definitely another concerning factor there. Yeah. And so the other one was kind of the opposite end of the spectrum, and kind of shifting away from technology. And then it was actually what is being called the low carbon economic model, or low carbon economy. And this was really interesting to discover, like, what does low carbon look like in the world? Who's a model for this? What are they doing? Globally, 39% of the electricity, right, actually comes from low carbon sources. Okay, so that's not a bad number if we look at kind of overall in the world, but it's very varied. So some countries are certainly carrying a heavier load of that than are other places in the world. Some countries, right, get almost all of the electricity from low carbon sources. Places like Paraguay, Iceland, Sweden, Uruguay, they get more than 95% of their electricity from low carbon sources. France, how interesting is this, gets more than 90%. And so, of course, these countries naturally are following a low carbon economic model. And it would be with other models, but it's critical and key to them. Low carbon electricity can actually come from things like nuclear or renewables like hydropower or solar or wind. Just depends on your country's resources and setup and what's going to work. So in Iceland and in Uruguay, most of electricity actually comes from renewables, particularly hydropower. Places like France, which, like I said, is 90%, coming from low carbon sources, and Sweden as well, nuclear is critical for those countries, and they use nuclear power. So I think really interesting examples there. And so there's not a long list of countries that are on this list. Also, there's 8 countries now that have reached net zero emissions, helping to combat climate change massively. And they have a really cool term for these countries. They call them carbon sinks, like a sink, because they're absorbing, more carbon dioxide from the atmosphere than they emit, right? And that's the goal. And most of these countries, they are small. Of course, they have very small industrial sectors, right? And that's the big key here. But they really prioritize ecological protection above most other things in this economic model. So some of the countries on this net zero emissions: Bhutan. Maybe this one people might have known, right? And Bhutan has this whole vision for the city they're going to create. I think we might have seen that in recent months. And they really operate on subsistence farming, sustainable forestry, and tourism. And they want to set themselves up as this wellness tourism sort of venue and place to be. We don't hear about the example, but Gabon in Africa, they have these amazing rainforests, right, that take up 88% of, I think, like the land mass. So they helped by the very setup of their natural resources and their land. But how cool is that? Another country called Comoros, Guyana, Panama, Suriname, Madagascar. These are all countries in Africa and South America. And so it certainly points again to where solutions might lie, what different countries are doing. Panama is actually joined forces with Suriname and Bhutan, and they have a carbon negative alliance. And so, they basically do carbon pricing support, trade that operates accordingly, and encourage each other's efforts to reach net zero. I think there's a lot we can learn from these countries. What I like about the low carbon energy model is it's something that doesn't need to even happen at the mass level. It can start right now in our neighborhoods, in our towns, in our municipalities, right? Is to bring that up and say, that's not a ridiculous goal. What do we do? And how do we educate our communities to start supporting this? Technology driven is right on the other end of the scale. But I think it's going to be so interesting to see how do we bring these differing ideas together for both economic prosperity, but also just protecting our environment and ourselves, our own well-being as well.
That's fascinating, Rocky. And I like that you brought up the alliance as well, because I think one thing I was thinking with some of the low carbon examples or fully sustainable eco villages, for example, that I saw, is the question you posed in the beginning was, how can you possibly scale something like this the bigger you bring it? But if you're doing more alliance work where you can share some of these best practices and really help encourage each other to do that, that's definitely helpful. And makes me wonder, there probably is some kind of coalition among some of these bigger eco cities on how to continue that work. Yeah, I think the big theme for me coming up is that word coexistence. On how do you, with all these changes moving into the future, I think, how do you help kind of forge this coexistence so they can really enhance each other versus kind of extract from each other, right?
I think you hit that on the head there, Sue. I think that's exactly it, right? I think the reason I brought up technology driven, although it's such an obvious one, is to say there's just no escaping this. I think right now there's this approach of you're either investing in AI and you're investing in these data centers, and it's seen as completely about profit, and you're opposed to it, and you're saying that's not the way we're going to go. But I think the reality lies somewhere really in that murky middle. I don't think we're backtracking on AI at this point in time. The intelligence can lend to incredible things like our longevity and our health and solutions, right, for us as a society. So how do we do that, but still protect our environments and do this the right way? And that can only come through other smarter models. Like, okay, how do we do low carbon, and how do we get technology to support us creating those kinds of models? It's never going to be perfect, but I do believe that we can, pull and push different levers at different times for prosperity and wellness. I do believe that's achievable. I think what stands in the way of that is the complexity and bringing people together in agreement. the very human stuff, which can make things complicated.
Yeah, absolutely. And one thing that seems clear to me is it can't be the status quo. There are too many things that are moving forward for us to just say kind of the existing economic models that we've been operating on are just the ones that we're going to move into the future. I mean, so much of our world is changing, whether you even think about the movement into AI and tech, you do think about the longevity, like these are all real situations that we don't currently have major solutions for that are working together. So yeah, I will meet you in that murky middle. Yeah, and I am encouraged that there are people that have already thought about this. There are cities, no matter how big or small, that are really starting to invest in these pilots because we don't actually have that much time before it's here, right? So some of it's already here that we have to think about. I think this was an important grounding as we get into the next couple of weeks of really thinking about the future of finance, investing, and money, because underlying it is kind of these assumptions of how do we think our world works and how might it change in the future and what are some of these new innovations actually addressing. So I hope you stick with us for the next couple of weeks as we explore this theme. Thank you as always for listening and watching. And if you have any comments or suggestions, meet us at YouTube on our channel and provide some comments there. But as always, we appreciate your time and we will see you next week.